All right, I have noon, and so I want to make sure that we are aware of everyone's time, and I want to welcome you. I'm Christine Purvis Johnson, President of the Conservation Foundation of the Gulf Coast. We're honored today to have Lindsay Cross with us, but a few housekeeping things to let you guys know. We will have Q&A, but you will be needing to type them into the Q&A portion down at the bottom of your screen. And we'll do that about a quarter of hour. So for the first 45 minutes, it'll be presentation and a couple of conversation between Lindsay and myself. And then we'll open it up for those questions that you put into the Q&A down at the bottom of your screen. So Lindsay Cross, thank you very much for having the time to be with us today. We know that you're really busy, especially on this time of year right before elections, and as well with the work that you're doing on the MCORs. Lindsay Cross is the Government Relations Director for the Florida Conservation Voters, a nonpartisan, nonprofit environmental advocacy organization. She engages with residents, community leaders, and elected officials at all levels of government to advance policies and funding to protect and restore water and land. Previously, she served as the executive director of the Florida Wildlife Corridor from 2016 to 2018, where she guided the organization's strategic vision for a statewide connected corridor of land and water that benefits wildlife and people. She worked for 14 years at the Tampa Bay Estuary Program and as the Environmental Science and Policy Manager, coordinated multi-entity habitat restoration and water quality improvement projects. In 2018, Lindsay ran for the Florida State Senate District 24 with a focus on protecting the environment and improving public education. She holds a bachelor's in environmental health from Colorado State University and a master's in environmental science and policy from the University of South Florida. Again, we're honored to have you, and we appreciate the time to talk to us today about this important, very important issue. Lindsay.
Thank you so much, Christine. It's such a pleasure to be here with you and members of the Conservation Foundation of the Gulf Coast. I'm always so impressed at the excellent and proactive work that you all are doing, and hope we can talk a little bit more about your work after this presentation. It really is a top of line issue right now for people in our state, especially people who are concerned about Florida's water, our land, our wildlife, and our taxpayer investments. So I'm going to be able to share an issue that I've been involved with for the past year and a half, and it's related to the toll roads and the task force process that's been going on for about 15 months now, called the Multi-Use Corridors of Regional and Economic Significance, or shortened MCORs. So I'm going to share my screen right now and go through some slides that hopefully will give all of you watching some history on where we are with this toll roads, and some ways that you all can be engaged in fighting against what we call the roads to ruin. So the No Roads to Ruin, to begin with, this is a coalition of 99 organizations and businesses that have cooperatively joined together because we have concerns about the proposed toll roads and what they can do to the future of our state. We know that infrastructure such as roads and development are a part of our life here in Florida, with one of the fastest growing populations, nearing 22 million residents in the state of Florida. We know that population growth really has not slowed down even during this global pandemic, but that there's a very strong need for policies that look first at protecting our natural areas and our water quality before putting developments in place that can have irrevocable damage to those things. In particular, the Florida state panther is our state animal, and it's a beloved icon and something that we treasure here in the state. Unfortunately, for the Florida panther, collisions with automobiles and other vehicles is the #1 cause of mortality. Roads are deadly, and there needs to be more effort to be having efforts to protect animals like the Florida panther that have a wide habitat range, and in particular, a road that I'll discuss that's proposed for the southern part of our state could have serious implications for the Florida panther. So just really broadly, and wow, this looks really yellow on this on this screen. The Roads to Ruin, or the MCORS project, first started with a piece of legislation last year, which was Senate Bill 7068. This was a priority of our current Senate President, Bill Galvano, from the Bradenton area. So he may be your local elected official for some of you watching. This is a proposal to put in potentially 330 new miles of toll roads and associated infrastructure. This bill was rushed through the legislature towards the end of session. It had very little discussion at committee meetings, and unfortunately was voted almost unanimously by our Florida State Senate, with only one person voting against it, which is a senator from the Miami area, Jose Javier Rodriguez, and a handful of representatives did vote against it on the House side. In looking at this bill, it has serious implications for both ecological and human health. It is a significant infrastructure proposal with a very abbreviated, very rushed timeline, which does divert investments from our existing needs. And the process of MCORS has been going on formally since August, but will come to a conclusion on November 15th. So in just over a month, this first part of this MCOR process will be concluded. The project, or the program in total, as I mentioned, could result in up to 330 new miles of tolled road throughout our state. There are 3 corridors in particular that are being discussed that make up that 330 miles. Starting in the southern part of the state, which is closest to probably all of you members and people interested in protecting the resources along Florida's Gulf Coast, is the Southwest Central Connector. This is a road that would go from Collier County in the south up to Polk County in the middle of our state. This is a 9-county area, and this is a place where the Florida panther habitat is a very critical resource. In the northern part of the state, we have the Suncoast Connector, which is an 8-county area, which would take a road from potentially from Citrus County up to the Georgia border through Jefferson County at the northern terminus. And then potentially connecting those two pieces is the Florida Turnpike, which is a 4-county area, which encompasses an area that would connect the Florida Turnpike to the Suncoast Parkway, which currently exists in Citrus County. Some work that we did with the Florida Natural Areas Inventory, looking initially at what some of the critical natural resources are that could be endangered as a result of these toll roads. This is just a quick view of some of the Florida Ecological Greenways Network, some of our highest priority conservation areas that could be in danger, as well as some mitigation banks and some conservation easements. This, of course, includes projects that have already been on the Florida Forever list. So those are areas that we as taxpayers have invested in and helped to protect through programs like the Land and Water Conservation Fund. And you'll see in these hash lines that there are several areas within the Southwest Central area, also up into the Suncoast corridor. And I will show some maps with some further detail of some of the natural resources that could lie in the potential pathway of a toll road. This is work that has been done, some of this GIS mapping that has been done by Department of Transportation, who is overseeing this project. And the image on the left is all of these different natural resource areas that have been overlaid onto these study corridors. So in the Suncoast Connector, you can see that most of this 7-county area is blanketed with something that you and I as conservationists and people concerned about our water and our wildlife and our natural areas, really the entire area has some significant resources. If you're looking at some of our springs and our springs priority focus areas, those areas are noted in blue. We have a lot of critical landscapes that make up things like the Florida Wildlife Corridor, which are in some of the darker green areas. Plus there's other properties that are either owned by the state or some of our national entities, or they are on approved lists to be purchased if there is money through programs like the Land and Water Conservation Fund that's appropriately allocated to conservation. Department of Transportation has then suggested some places shown on the graph to the right that could be avoided. They also use the term attraction areas where they would like to bring economic development as a result of these roads. But for us concerned about some of the conservation areas, the areas in the dark magenta are places where these are complete avoidance areas. In the light pink, those are places where DOT is committed to no new corridors through. But you can still see that there are significant portions of the Suncoast Connector that are not shown on this map on the right as being avoided. This similar exercise can be done for the Northern Turnpike Connector, and the following slide will show the Southwest Central Connector. And all of these mapping exercises are available on DOT's MCOR's websites. So if there's something in particular that you are concerned about, this is just some of the layers. We could be looking at some of our critical wildlife and overlaying those type of layers onto here as well. This is, still a pretty comprehensive list, and you'll see that in this part of the potential corridor, again, there's a lot of important water resources, whether those are springs or priority focus areas. We have significant state parks and forests, as well as wildlife management areas. Some of them have been respected as places that they will not be impacted or no new corridors through. In particular, on the eastern part of the study area is the Marion County Farmland Preservation Area, which went through a very thorough community-based vetting process where people in that community understood the value of agriculture and keeping some of these rural landscapes intact. So within their county comprehensive plans have actually memorialized that as part of their farmland preservation area. And then going down to the Southwest Central Connector, this is a place where, again, there's a lot of prime Florida panther habitat. And you see many of the areas in dark green. Those are places that may be either Florida Forever acquired properties, places within the Everglades resources. Much of this area is within either the Everglades or the headwaters of the Everglades. So really critical for a lot of the restoration work that's going on and protecting the wildlife habitats. Some of our highest biodiversity is in areas within these counties along the Lake Wales Ridge and other places. And of course, you can see that there is, while Sarasota and Manatee County are not included in the study corridors, there may be connectivity with other conservation lands that are priorities either for your organization or other partners that could be impacted from either the direct or indirect effects of new roads and developments. So backing up a little bit, why we're concerned about this is we know that roads in and of itself can have an impact. There's also the induced development that usually comes with when road projects are built. We know that to put roads in place, there needs to be, or there should be, a documented need for those. And often they can spur new development, whether those are interchanges where people get off, get some gas and a snack, or they're meant to be a place where new urban development is incentivized. With those roads, there is an increase in both air and water pollution, pollution from the cars and the emissions, water pollution from the chemicals and pollutants on the roadways, as well as the impact of transferring natural areas into asphalt and roadways, what we call impervious surfaces. There's more runoff, which can change the flow of water, can increase the temperature and the pollutant load to receiving water bodies such as wetlands, springs, and aquifer recharge areas. We know that they are bad for our wildlife. roads and developments have a way of fragmenting habitat. And for our Florida panther, the Florida black bear, and other species, some of them have a very wide habitat range, which means they need many miles of connected habitat for them to be able to move safely, to find enough food sources, and to find breeding habitats. The male Florida panther in particular has about a 200 square mile habitat range, which is quite significant. And if we're putting roads through what is our existing Florida panther habitat, that just makes it even more difficult for those animals to travel safely. And the number one cause of the Florida panther death, again, is collisions with vehicles. There is some concern also that because this program was envisioned to use primarily state and state funding sources and toll road revenues, not federal funds, that some of our stricter environmental policies like the National Environmental Policy Act, or NEPA, may be avoided, which could mean that these roads, which are already on a fast timeline, that could be sped up even more. So mentioning the timeline, within this legislation, there's a 15-month time period to examine the need for these roads, some of the impacts to them. But then there's also a charge for the Department of Transportation to begin construction on the MCORS project no later than December 31st of 2022. So that's just about 2 years from now, and to have this project completed by 2030. So that is a very aggressive timeline for a road construction project. If you think of going to your county commission and asking for a new stoplight, that may take a couple years. This is envisioning hundreds of miles of new infrastructure to be completed in less than 10 years. Our water supply is certainly one of our most important resources in our state. And as we see news reports of wastewater discharges and continued threats from algae blooms and toxic blue-green algae, we know that our waters are impaired. The state is investing resources in that, and local communities are as well. More development and impacts from these roads will further threaten our water resources, especially impacting our freshwater resources, which are the Florida aquifer is the drinking water source for about 90% of Floridians. So our freshwater resources really are the one of the most important things that we need to keep top in mind when we're looking at these type of infrastructure projects and any new developments. This project will be bad for our economy. Some of these statistics were put on here before we entered into this global economic and health pandemic that we're experiencing right now. But if you've driven on roads throughout our state, you know that there's places where we need improvements. This is a picture of a bridge from over in southeast Florida, where we see examples of crumbling infrastructure. We're ranked about 40th in the nation in terms of cost effectiveness and condition. So we have existing needs within our more urban areas right now, where people are using roads, are using bridges, really asking for more multimodal and public transportation options. The roads within the MCORS areas are through some of our most sparsely populated counties, many of them with a population of less than $200,000. And the need for these roads has not been documented. There's been significant investments already made in this MCORS project, with about $135 million allocated through the first 2 years in 2019 and 2020, with more than $100 million to be invested in this program annually after that. So it's a significant investment that we've made already without the need, and while we have a backlog of infrastructure upgrades that need to happen. As I mentioned, these roads are envisioned to go through some areas that have lower populations. And while we think it's important to have investments in rural communities, we do need to be sensitive to our limited budget and our resources. This is information from some population estimates from the Bieber modeling, which shows that the lighter color, the lower population these communities are. So the idea of putting new roads, potentially toll roads, through places where we have lower population, where we have some existing roads like US 19 that are already sufficient for the needs that we have right now, just does not seem like it's the best investment. And roads have also been documented to do little to address congestion, that building new roads often leads to more congestion rather than less congestion. So as I'm going through some of these topics, these are things that are listed as aspirational goals as part of the MCOR's project. It's meant to address urban revitalization, hurricane evacuation, broadband infrastructure, other investments in utilities such as sewer infrastructure and in rural areas that would come along with the development of the road. And what we have known from the beginning is that many of these things can and should be accomplished without a new road. Rural communities, we are fortunate to have many places that there are iconic small Florida towns like Monticello, and the northern part areas like Immokalee in the southwest central area that have vibrant downtown areas and communities of their own. We know that roads can have negative impacts on the character of these roads, sometimes by bypassing the roads or by putting a lot of new traffic, a lot of truck traffic and undesirable congestion through these roads. We've seen numerous communities, whether it's counties or cities, take up resolutions requesting that these toll roads not come through their communities because their rural character is something that they want to keep intact. For example, Levy County, which is part of both the Northern Turnpike and the Suncoast Connector, has passed a no-build resolution. The city of Cedar Key has done that. Alachua County has. There's been other counties and cities that have discussed it at their elected bodies because they are concerned about these. Roads, as I mentioned, do tend to spur new development. In Florida, there's places where we have examples of good growth management, and then there's also examples where we have a lot of greenfield development, where we're taking some of our most valuable natural and agricultural lands and putting some of these developments there, which have little character, which necessitate a lot of land conversion, will have impacts on our water quality and our wildlife habitats. And this is part of a larger need for growth management that addresses smart ways to grow and allow new people to come and be welcomed into our state. There's been some independent reports that have been done by organizations, and I highlight one by a group called Florida Tax Watch. They looked specifically at the Suncoast Connector in the northern part of the state and wanted to know what some of the implications would be for taxpayers. This is an independent, nonpartisan government watchdog who did this report, and they had serious concerns putting the price tag for the Suncoast Connector at between $4 and $10.5 billion. Based on estimates of what it cost DOT to put in a road in the Orlando area called the Wekiva Parkway, which has been held up as kind of the gold standard of how to do a road which has adequate wildlife crossings and has protection of some of the natural resources. If you extrapolate that up, a study by the Sierra Club and Thousand Friends of Florida suggested that the price tag for all three roads could be about $26.4 billion. So that's a significant amount of investments. When you think our state budget on an annual basis is about $90 billion. This could divert funding from other local transportation projects. The Department of Transportation has acknowledged that there may not be money to build all these roads, and it may require a piecemeal approach, and that if funding is not available through the Transportation Trust Fund or general revenue, they may look through funding through the Transportation Enterprise Fund, which means that tolls generated in other parts of the state, such as Orlando or the South Florida area, could and are likely to be used to subsidize the construction and the maintenance of roads in other parts of the state. So that means that users who, or people who are not using the roads may still be footing a significant part of the bill. And it may mean that some of their local projects are put on hold or not funded at all. This year, our state budget was just over $90 billion as a result of some of the economic downturn due to the pandemic. Our governor at the beginning of July vetoed more than $1 billion from the budget. That included more than $90 million for infrastructure improvements, for water quality improvements, such as upgrading wastewater treatment plants or putting sewer lines in. So we've had more than $90 million of vetoes. What's astounding is that the MCOR's budget not only stayed intact, but it actually increased from $90 million to about $117 million. So this, the funding for MCORs has been written into the budget in DOT's 5-year work plan in a way which makes it very difficult to unravel and to veto parts of it. And that's concerning because this is a large project that should have more oversight from our elected leaders as well as our community members. Several years ago, a group comprised of the Thousand Friends of Florida, Department of Ag, and the University of Florida did an analysis of what our state looks like now and what it could look like in 2070 with moderate or medium population growth. On the left is a statewide trend, and on the right it shows an alternative to that. What the main difference that you'll see is that places here in green, those are areas that are some of our highest priority conservation areas that are part of the Florida Wildlife Corridor, which is priority 1 and 2 in the Florida Ecological Greenways Network. This study recommends first protecting our most valuable conservation areas and agricultural areas. This is almost in the direct pathway of where the MCOR's Southwest Central connector could go. You also see that places within the Suncoast connector, you don't see as much population growth here, but yet there is a proposal to put a new high-speed toll road through this part of the state where we don't see the growth. Again, that looks at more need for better planning on the front end and having the data to validate putting growth where it is going to have least impact to our water supply and some of our conservation lands. So if we did protect our areas as the alternative of this 2070 recommendations, we would have much more connectivity between our wildlife areas and more protection of our water resources. This is an example of a turnpike that was built in Broward County. So the idea of just having the initial impacts from a road is false. These roads do spur other development, which then permanently changes the landscape in those areas. And then this is an example from somewhere in the Everglades where you can see the stark difference of the development on the right side of the screen compared to the left side. And I don't know the exact area of this, but obviously one part is protected and the other part is not. Touching on some of the other things that are included in the MCOR's legislation, one of the other goals is hurricane evacuations. As we have another hurricane that is in our Gulf right now and could threaten western parts of the Panhandle and some of our other Gulf neighbors. Of course, this is something that is something that we deal with as Floridians and that we need to take very seriously. However, the roads that are proposed through MCORs do not have the data to support that this is the best way to address hurricane evacuation. The state's own emergency management website has contrary recommendations, which is actually for Floridians to evacuate closer to home, preferably in their own counties, and not making mass evacuations from our state. It is also important to note that our state, there has not been a statewide hurricane evacuation plan that's been undertaken in more than 10 years, despite the increases in population. So those type of data are really important before we put millions and billions of dollars into new infrastructure. The governor did allocate some money to begin that exercise this year. So that would be an important piece of data to know before this process continues. The process overall, we believe, has been flawed. One of the primary reasons because it has been very rushed. Within each of the task forces, there's, and maybe I didn't define what the task force is, but for each of the study corridors, there's been a task force appointed by the governor of roughly 40 to 45 members who have been tasked. One of their charges is to first evaluate the need for the roads and the impacts, whether those are positive or negative in terms of hurricane evacuation, protection of habitat, water resources, investments in our rural communities, broadband infrastructure, things of that nature. This process began in Tampa in August of 2019 and will wrap up next month with a final report due to the governor, the Speaker of the House, and the Senate President. So in terms of regular or kind of tried and true transportation planning, this is a very aggressive timeline. Most transportation plans take between 8 to 10 years from the development of the idea, the examination of some of the impacts, design phases, mitigation, and then finally construction. So this 15-month planning process is very aggressive. It is not consistent with the way DOT typically undertakes planning. Once the pandemic happened and we had to limit our in-person meetings, DOT switched to an online, a virtual format for their webinars and then their task force meetings. Unfortunately, what that meant is that it really limited public involvement in the process. This is a screenshot that I took of some of my comments that I made in a webinar. You would be lucky to see the faces of a few of the DOT representatives, but there was no visual interaction with the task force members who are having to make recommendations to our highest level elected leaders. It is a very impersonal way. And at the beginning, at the start of these virtual webinars, there were significant technology failures, which resulted in only about 20% of people being able to successfully provide their public comments. So we did have concerns that this, something that is so significant to our state, should have been put on pause during this pandemic and waited until we could do it in a way that allowed for more meaningful public input. The stage that we're at right now is DOT has issued draft task force reports for each 3 of the study corridors. They issued those or publicized those on September 29th. That triggered a 15-day public comment period. So that means that all public comments have to be received by October 14th, which is just a week from today. I pulled out some of the language here from the first page of each of the task force reports that first identifies that there was limited data analysis conducted. The task forces did not reach conclusion based on the information available that there's need for a completely new greenfield corridor or new road footprint, that there was a preference for improvements or expansion of existing highway corridors, and that DOT should consider a no-build alternative. So those are things that, that we have been stressing both through the Florida Conservation Voters, the No Roads to Ruin Coalition, and other concerned members. First of all, that this was a process that did not have the data to warrant this investment in our state resources to undertake this process in this way. The reports also acknowledge that some of the things such as development of broadband infrastructure or other investments in utilities for rural communities could be done without a toll road, and analysis by groups like Cornell Consulting have shown that it can be done at a much lower price point if we're doing it and it's not tied directly to a road project. An important point of clarification, when you look at the term no build, which has been kind of the rallying cry for many of us, DOT defines that in their draft task force reports, that no build means that there are no major capacity, infrastructure capacity investments, as well as no investments in land acquisition, utilities, or broadband. So in essence, DOT is saying that there is an all or none scenario, that if we want to provide broadband or protect conservation areas through the MCORS project, it has to come with these new roads. And we think that this is not a fair proposition to our state, that we have overwhelming needs, which includes investments in rural communities, but those should come without the strings attached with a major new toll road. So I'll go through a few ways that you all can be engaged as we end this 15-month period. In particular, the task force meetings, which have been in public, now are virtually. There is one last round of task force meetings, which will be held early in the week of October 19th. October 19th will be the Southwest Central. October 20th, which is a Tuesday, will be the Suncoast Connector. And then the final one will be the Northern Turnpike on October 21st. Those are envisioned now as being in-person meetings in Tampa, as well as a virtual option. So there is opportunity for you to participate remotely in those. In the past, the public comment period has been at the very end of a long day, around 5 p.m. We are led to believe that public comment will be at the beginning of this round of meetings, around 9 o'clock a.m. So that is your last time to provide public comment during one of the meetings itself. There is a form on DOT's website, a general contact form where you can put concerns, either through this form or through emailing them at fdot.listens. DOT has been a bit reluctant to fully categorize the public comments that have been received. In addition to what they consider these unique comments, there's been groups like Florida Conservation Voters who have had sign-on letters and petitions in opposition to these roads that has not been given the same recognition that some of these other comments have. We know through analysis of these comments that around 93% of them are in opposition to the road because of the concerns to water, to wildlife, to rural areas, and to agriculture. If you would like to comment specifically on the draft final reports, these reports are about 40 pages each. There is a comment form on DOT's website, so you would need to input your comments directly into that form. Again, those are being taken until, I believe it's 1 p.m. on Wednesday, October 14th. Florida Conservation Voters has also made it easy for people to sign petitions, to make recommendations to DOT and to our lawmakers through a series of 3 different petitions, through our action portal. The most recent one on the far left is our last call, say no build on the roads, because we feel like these investments need to be made without new toll roads. So those are opportunities for you to be engaged. There has been significant coverage, I would say, in our local media. I know people are always interested in what they can do. If this is an issue that speaks to you and you would like to write a short op-ed or letter to the editor in your local paper, I've been fortunate to be able to share some thoughts through different media outlets. For example, the Tampa Bay Times and the Citrus Chronicle. It may not have been covered as much in your local area, simply because it's not part of the study corridor, but there will still be implications to you both ecologically and economically. And of course, staying current on the news and sharing it with people in your circle of influence. It's kind of amazing that an investment of this degree has had as little understanding or coverage, but it's also it also makes sense because there are so many other pressing issues that we're dealing with right now. So we think this is a time to be focusing on the true needs that we have as a state right now and not misusing our taxpayer dollars through these toll roads. Finally, we need to hold our elected officials accountable to this. We will have a change in elected officials on some levels after the November 3rd ballot, but it is perfectly acceptable for you to ask your people on your ballot what they think about the MCORs. If they voted yes for it, if they were not in the legislature, what they would do to help defund the program and reinvest the money into other community priorities. So it's important that our elected officials know that we are holding them accountable and that we want to see investments in places that will really benefit our entire state. So really we have a choice in how we develop as a state. We can look like this, or we can put a preference on protecting some of these gorgeous places that we have right now. So I would encourage you to visit the No Roads to Ruin website or the Florida Conservation Voters website. You can also contact me directly through my email here. And really, it's been a pleasure to provide this background and where we are on this process right now.
Thank you, Lindsay. That was a lot of information in a short time. But it's so important, really. And you're right, because we're not one of those counties, Manatee, and Sarasota, where I believe most of our listeners and participants in this are living. We don't get as much information, which is why we were so glad that you were able to give us an hour of your time to tell us about it. A couple of follow-up questions, and probably to bring it on home to our listeners. Conservation Foundation is in the 5 coastal counties, from Manatee to Collier, which of course 3 of which are in this plan. But as well, we have staked the claim of a conservation corridor that's west of the one that you were working on. And so that goes from Duet Preserve in northeast Manatee County to the Myakka Island of lands, then on to Babcock Webb in Charlotte County, and then from Babcock Webb down to the Everglades. And how we do that parcel by parcel could involve 2 of the counties that we currently aren't protecting land in. It could involve Hardee and DeSoto, which of course this would be, the Southwest Connector would be part of that. So I want to make sure that people listening understand that it could involve some of our visionary work to connect up these, large pieces of already protected land. Mm-hmm. But I also wanted to ask you, what on a broader scale, how would they impact these 3 different connectors? How would they impact on a broader scale the conservation lands that we've already protected as a state?
Yeah, that's a great question, Christine. And thank you for the clarification on where some of your focus areas are. When we look at protecting our land and our water, we do that through various funding mechanisms at the federal, the state, and the local level. At the state, our kind of premier land buying and protection program is called Florida Forever. And I know it's something that you all tapped into and were successful last year, or actually in 2020, in getting funding for Orange Hammock Ranch. And that is just a gorgeous landscape and such an important piece of property to protect. This year in our budget, we received $100 million for the entire suite of conservation programs, which includes Florida Forever, the Rural and Family Lands Protection Program, and the Florida Communities Trust, plus a few other smaller programs. $100 million is only a third of where we used to be prior to the recession in 2008. When you compare that to the MCOR's budget, which is more than $100 million a year, what it does is it puts into question what the priorities of our state and our legislature are. If these new roads are built, it would be extremely difficult for them to be constructed without impact to either lands that we already own as a state that you and I have paid for with our taxpayer dollars, or those that are on approved lists to be acquired or protected when funds are available. So just because DOT makes a statement that they will avoid impacts or not put new roads through, we know that there's examples where lands that have been protected are impacted, and then there's supplemental mitigation or kind of paying to undo some of that damage. But we run the risk when we do that of irrevocably fragmenting some of those habitats and ruining the chances to maintain some of this large landscape connectivity. So there is the likelihood that some of our existing lands or our conservation priorities could be impacted.
So to put a fine point on it, they could do a taking of what we've already said we wanted protected and have protected. They could do a taking.
I think DOT wants to avoid something like that, but if you look at the Suncoast Parkway 2, which is an extension of the toll road in Citrus County, it went through the Withlacoochee State Forest, which is a state-owned property. They did mitigate for that by purchasing land adjacent to the Chassahowitzka Wildlife Management Area, increasing habitat for the Florida black bear there, but they did go through a state forest. And there's, it's not always possible to avoid these lands.
And hence your comment about then fragmenting the corridors and the habitats, not only, of course, for plants and animals, but as well for us. Now we have a road going through one of our state parks.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. And you tied this to elections and that elections matter. But also talk about there's what, 5 counties now, of course Manatee is one, for ballot measures for dedicated funding sources. I think Volusia is another one. I think Collier's trying to also re-up theirs. Volusia's re-upping theirs. What about those types of land where counties are protecting lands? And I believe they happen in all 3 of these corridor where these roads are perhaps going to go through.
Yeah, so funding, as I mentioned, happens both at the state level through programs like Florida Forever, at the federal level, programs like the Federal Land and Water Conservation Fund, and local county level funding is just as critical. So Manatee County, you have the opportunity to kind of vote to reapprove a successful program that has protected land and water in your county. Many counties have done this time and time again. Floridians value conservation. They vote for conservation initiatives at the ballot, such as the Land and Water Conservation Fund, which was a ballot initiative in 2014, which is responsible for some of our investments right now. But at the local level, when you may not be able to get some of those funds from the state, it's really important that you have regional and county plans that are looking not only at some of these larger projects, but just as important are the parks and preserves that are close to where people live. It's important for people to have access to nature and improving your physical and your mental health, especially during a pandemic when we're trying to get outside and find ways to stay safe and healthy. Having local parks is critical, and we see that these county and local land buying programs fill that really necessary gap and that need.
Great. Turning to some of the questions that we have in the chat, in the Q&A portion. The first is from Chris. And the question is, have the owners of the cattle ranches in the Central Corridor been contacted about this? You mentioned the ones in, I think it was Marion County, But what about the other ones? Have those cattle ranchers, those farmers been contacted? Have they organized? Because a lot of them do consider themselves stewards of the land.
I would assume that most of the people with agriculture or ranches in these areas know about the program and the implications it can have for them, either what they may believe is positive or negatively. A lot of these larger ranches, which are so critical for wildlife connectivity as well as food production, and some of the other ecosystem services like storing and treating water in wetlands on site. One of the concerns is that because we have not had enough investments in our conservation programs for close to a decade, after the 2008 recession, our conservation funding was zeroed out. And it's just been in the past couple years as a result of this ballot or this amendment in 2014 that we've started to see some more consistent funding. When you look at a ranching family that has held something in their family for potentially multiple generations, there's always a question of how to continue that stewardship and that legacy. And conservation easements and being able to purchase some of those areas is important for maintaining these ranches and these large landscapes. If we can't pay farmers and ranchers to protect their lands or to prevent it from being developed, when some of this land changes hands, when the older generations pass away and pass these lands down to children and grandchildren, it often becomes divided and it makes easy prey for developers to come in and purchase those areas. So for some of these landowners, they may be seeing a new toll road and development as a way for them to cash out because they don't have any other options. So that means that we need to have more and better alternatives for them than just to sell their land to a developer.
Okay. Thank you, Lindsay. Another question from Jim, which I think, you touched on how this project is not, has not come about in the usual way, way. That it's not, it hasn't come from need, it hasn't come from FDOT's search and research. So Jim's question is, what is behind it? Is politics, state legislators? What's driving this?
Mm-hmm. I think you hit on a couple of them. Politics. I think I think part of it's ego on the part of our Senate president that, everyone wants to leave a legacy, but I would want to leave a legacy of improvement rather than destruction. There's also a suggestion that there's some landowners that have significant land holdings in one or more of the corridor study areas that would benefit financially from those. Those are people, the name Thomas Petterfee comes to mind as someone who has a lot of land holdings in the Suncoast connector area, as well as some properties in the Southwest Central, is a campaign contributor to some of our elected officials, and this may be something that would benefit him.
Interesting. A lot of money.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of money. And then we have, I think, just one last question coming from Bill. Is there some preliminary work being done by the coalition to investigate possible legal challenges to this legislation?
That's a great question. We're still looking at what our strategy is going to be after the task force reports are delivered on November 15th. We know that we'll be looking at legislation in the 2021 session to defund the program. As I mentioned, it's within the budget and the DOT's 5-year work plan in a way which makes it very difficult to unravel, and there's not the opportunity for a line item veto of this particular part of the budget. But we know that there are elected officials that are asking us what they can do and how we can reappropriate some of the money. So we will be looking at legislation. There are groups throughout the state that do use legal strategies to fight that work. That's not a role that Florida Conservation Voters plays, but there are organizations that may be looking at legal tactics after November 15th.
It's interesting you said it's kind of hard to unravel, but it's interesting that this legislation put it into their work plan. So you would think, and it wasn't there before. So I'm not an attorney, but I would think then that the same tactics perhaps could be used to take it out of the work plan. Is that not true?
I'm not an expert on how some of these budget initiatives, how to unravel them. I think it's easier to put it in and then things just continue. It's more difficult to, I believe, to remove it. I think it was crafted in a way that that requires less oversight of it once it is in the budget. And it's something, if we're taking a close look at all of our programs and our priorities as a state, if the governor is vetoing, local projects to reduce flooding or, improve water quality, something of this magnitude should receive the same or increased scrutiny that some of these other local projects do.
Right. It has the potential to be a quarter of an annual budget. Is massive. Well, I want to say thank you so very much for your time. I know you are really busy on this. I want to make an announcement to everyone on. Thank you again for staying on and making the time. After we sign off, your link will automatically take you to the page the MCourse page where you can give comment. So if you missed that, you didn't write it down or whatever, please know that this link will take you there if you just stay on after we sign off. And then furthermore, we're going to post this on our website. Florida Conservation Voters will have the opportunity to also post it on theirs. We're going to post it on social media so that people will be able to view this hour at their leisure. And you, of course, we ask that you also post on your social media and let people know so that they can educate themselves and make comment before the deadline of
October 14th.
Thank you. Thank you. Any other questions? Lindsay, parting remarks?
Make sure you vote.
It matters.
It matters.
Again, thank you all very much. And Lindsay, your email real quick.
Lindsay, Lindsay @fcvoters.org.
And the fcvoters.org is also the website for Florida Conservation Voters where they can also find out more information, correct?
That's correct.
fcvoters.org. Oh, one more question. Sorry, before we got 2 minutes. Oh, so thank you.
Okay, you're welcome.
Again, thank you all very much. Really appreciate it. And make sure you vote. Thank you, Lindsay.
Thank you, Christine.